I wrote a book called The New Manufacturing Challenge. It's about waste elimination. And the book sold quite well in 12 languages. And it's about eliminating waste in business, often in manufacturing, but it's the same in information processing because all the business activity is value added, and we want to eliminate non value added. But if you look at how we use our mind, we can apply the same concept of waste elimination. Mm. We often think about what you want to do, what you desire, and what's important. But life is such that some of those things may not be as clear. And instead of trying to seek for what to do and how important, one other way is to keep on reducing or eliminating the waste in what we do. So what's left is what's more desirable. I think Charlie Munger mentioned about inversion. Instead of trying to do something, just get rid of things that you don't want to do. And that will leave you an option to figure out what is more important. And often that approach, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but is very pragmatic because there's many things that you don't want to do and you just don't do it if you can practice it with good discipline. And the same applies in business, like I mentioned in the book I wrote. So let's see what we can connect those two things. One is more external situation of how we process things, but the other is internal situation of how we process our brain, how we use our brain. And if we eliminate lots of waste in what we do in our brain, we may be awakened, even enlightened. So let's give it a try if you don't mind. So let's figure out. In the book I wrote, I talked about 7 waste, but added the 8th one. And the 7 of them, if I can remember, is the processing waste, waste of generating the defect, waste of creating the inventory, waste of overproduction, waste of transportation, waste of moving, or waste of waiting for something to come. So those are the 7 waste, and I remember it still. The 8th waste I put is the waste of not utilizing our talent, your potential talent. So that's the point that I can switch those 7 waste to figure out what we do in our brain, in our mind. So let's go quickly. I don't know if I can repeat the whole thing. We can talk about the waste of the processing. Certain thinking process may be much easier if we are not that confused. If we have a quiet, calm and quiet mind, we can see things better. So instead of jumping around all over the place and wasting time and energy, we may get to the core of the issues that you can get to. So even if the process may be cumbersome and difficult to figure out, but by simplifying the process, combining the process or eliminating the process itself would leave the more important stuff to think about, use our brain. So that's the processing waste. Of course, the producing defect is the waste. So in our thinking, we want to have a logical process following the law of nature instead of jumping into conclusion and making a mistake and so forth. So do it diligently, following the steps may help us to not to create defect. Defect in this case in our mind is that probably suffering or wasting time or frustration, any of that. We don't want to create that. As soon as we start to see us doing it, we want to eliminate. That's the second waste. What made the third one? Okay, inventory waste. In our brain, we can accumulate lots of knowledge. That's the inventory. But if we are full of knowledge, it clogs up the system perhaps. Neurons busy processing and retaining those heavy, I feel like heavy, all the information in there, which may not be necessary to live a life in a more pleasant, awakened, and happy way. So we may need to get rid of it. And one way is that if we start to use unnecessary information, we may stop it and then think this is meaningful not. And then if it's not meaningful, wasteful, and creating the inventory, we stop them. The fourth waste of the overproduction is similar. Before creating the inventory, you are overproducing things, which is like, what would be the example? Come up with some idea and another idea, another idea. You may create so many ideas, but you are full of ideas, but nothing is get done. So that's an inventory of ideas. So that might be an example that we don't need to do, to simplify the process and calmly process the information so that you know what you need to put more energy on instead of just accumulating tons of ideas. Well, it's possible that you accumulate ideas because you cannot solve it, and then later those ideas may develop some synthesis among themselves, come up with an idea. But still, in general, unnecessary knowledge may not be necessary to carry. So that's another one about overproduction. Transportation waste. What's in the brain? Transportation. If we are digging for information to find and it takes time, maybe it's just like excavating and figuring out to get to the information. So that may be the transportation. But the transportation can be from conscious mind to the unconscious mind. In that case, it takes time to go dig into it. So sometimes it's necessary, but some of the transportation waste may be unnecessary. Let's see if I can come up with any idea of transportation. Well, let's leave it that. And the other one is the movement waste. It's the working, just shuffling information, but not, figuring out what can be done to process the information. And the seventh one, I don't remember what may be the last one. Anyway, those are just examples of the processes that we may want to get rid of to simplify and clear up our mind. And that helps this eighth waste, which is to reach out the potential of what need to be done. If we can process the elimination of waste, it makes us to be clear, much more open plate and open mind. To see things more clearly would help us to figure out what to do. So the point, I guess, is that the things that we can work on elimination of waste in our business or manufacturing or service industry, we can apply that in our internal process of how to use our mind. What's the lessons learned by going through this? I think the key lesson to me is we waste lots of energy in delusionally thought. And what delusionally thought is related to those wasteful activity in our brain. All those 7 points. There may be more. But as an example, we just dealt with various forms of the waste that we do. So the best thing we do is to cut it before we get involved in playing with it. Once we start to play with it, more idea may pop up to play more. And then in the meantime, you get lost from where you want to go, but rather to figure out what you're doing in your internal process so that the relationship of what you do and what the aim is become very blurred. That's not the productive way of doing things. Maybe what Elon Musk said makes sense. He talks about the first principle. To figure out something, figure out what's most important, the basic structure of what is to be done, and then put things together to make things happen. So in that approach, I would think he's probably a genius to be able to do that. In my case, I'm not sure if I can be practicing this first principle, but reverse thinking is that if we practice this elimination of waste process in our mind, that would leave the first principle. What is important is left over, and all the necessary things get cleared out. So you don't waste your time and energy for the unnecessaries, right? So it makes sense to me that we are doing the same thing. One is to approach directly, and the other one is eliminating the waste. So there are two different approaches to do it to get to the core of the issue. And I think pragmatic way, and that's what Charlie Munger says, is the inversion. If you're not go somewhere, well, his case is that if you don't want to die, then don't go there. That's the same thing as avoiding what is dangerous from the beginning. So this thinking, he says, is very pragmatic and gave him lots of insight. So after hearing him and then relating to my book about waste elimination, and this is also applied into Toyota production system, my whole book is now making sense within myself, not just activity we see outside, which is a reflection of what we think, but also our thinking itself. And the point then is about the delusionally thoughts shouldn't be dealt with because you figure out that's wasteful at the beginning. Now the next question is, can we practice it? If this, what I mentioned, makes sense, can we practice it? I can do that any time because you have your mind always playing this and that. So this experiment, if you want to call it, this is a serious experiment if you get good at it. Because if you practice it this often, then I think you are more relaxed. Because you don't have to be busy in doing things without actually not quite knowing if it's wasteful or not, but be occupied. So it may take some perseverance of not doing, because it's a habitual pattern of wanting to do something, even if that creates waste or defect, or create inventories and knowledge, too much information clogged up on the system, in your system of the mind. Right. So why don't we try that? I guess that's my message. And the reason for this message is based upon those two key points. One is my book, Waste Elimination, external thing. And the other one is related to the inversion, not doing things unnecessary to get to where you want to go. Right? So why don't we live like that? As Charlie Munger says, this is pragmatic. Most people can do it. But if I think why we don't do it, the possibility is we are eager to get to the solution so quickly. As a result, you mess things around. There are too much things being done and half done, and all the inventory, uncooked, processes, whatever, is clogging up the system. So my point is that to suggest maybe we should try this. How we try it? Observe what's going on in our mind. Well, that may be a difficult exercise, but with this principle that we talked about, maybe we are better prepared to do that. Just stay with calm and quiet mind instead of starting to do something. So you resist from doing, which is eliminating the potential waste that you generate. How to do it again? My answer to that is stay relaxed, calm, and quiet. Not jump on to do things here and there because you get lost easily. When I say this, I can reflect that I may do those things quite often. There may be a to-do list, and often people say procrastinate, and possibly that's the right thing. Instead of touching things or getting into it, if you leave those lists up there, or on your desk, or in your brain, whatever the situation is, but don't touch it, and to see which one is more important or not, and if everything is not so important, then just remain calm and learn to be calm. That may expose more important ideas to be checked. And again, you do the same thing. Is it really important or not? You don't jump into it. And in this way, you stop doing things. Actually, one of the concepts I wrote in the book, New Manufacturing Challenge, is a line stop concept. When the problems happens, instead of rushing and creating the inventory and shuffling around and using the computer to figure out what to do, we stop the line. It's a chaos in a way because the problem is exposed and everybody cannot work. But it's the inversion way of not doing so many things and getting clogged up as a result, but rather to be lean, as they call it, lean manufacturing or lean principle, waste elimination. It's much better to stop the line than doing things and make things messy in the factory or service or information, programming software, all of that. So that's the principle. In the book, we talk about reducing the inventories to do the same, to expose the problem. So in this case too, instead of rushing to do things, just stay out there. And what is really important, you start to work on it. So your life may get more simplified, easier to handle, and you have better clarity of what's going on, also related to the importance and the urgency of what needs to be done. Not to do everything, whatever pops up in your mind and process it. That's one way to do it. But the other way that I was going through, having a list and not doing and taking time and calm and quiet mind, that exposed the necessary things, important things first. Right. Then focus on that one. And we don't need to worry about the rest for the time being. Because that's the one that we found is important and perhaps urgent. My suggestion is try it out. If we just keep this discussion in your memory, it's an inventory waste. It occupies some space in your brain, and probably that's not so healthy. We want to live liberated. The work environment may not help you to do that, but given the situation, work or just living any situation, including the relationship and all that, be careful about jumping into the conclusion and then do things and lose the perspective, the balance, what's important and not. So to go slowly, it's like a rabbit and the turtle analogy. Maybe makes sense to be clear up a mind and move forward calmly, quietly, confidently, genuinely and truthfully and sincerely. Now you don't need to jump in to do something, but you can just spend little time to see what just happened and sort things out with calm and quiet mind. I'll keep doing it, and we may have a chance to revisit this later, some other voice memo, whatever the situation is. But talk is not the same as doing. Let's execute and see what happens, because we have to figure out all the bad habit and exchange to the good habit to be efficient and effective, not efficient in creating the defect or inventory or whatever comes with it. Do it right the first time. That's the idea. Maybe counterintuitive, I suggest we try.